Welcome back to Just the Truth. We're continuing the conversation about S1, which is this ridiculous bill that the Democrats are trying to push through the Senate, through Congress, to federalize elections, take away the power that is constitutionally given to the state legislatures. And several people noted that both Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell actually participated quite heavily today in the Rules Committee. And that means that this is really important to both sides. We know why, because we know that free and fair elections, secure elections, are so important to continuing the process of the Constitution and making sure that we, the people, get to select and prefer our leaders. This is what Mitch McConnell had to say today.
Let's take a look at the bill. This legislation will let Washington Democrats dictate the terms of their own re-election races by rewriting all 50 states' election law. Popular safeguards like voter ID would be neutered. Ludicrous practices like ballot harvesting would be mandatory coast to coast. Democrats have a narrow majority in the House and a 50-50 Senate, but they want to make themselves the board of elections for every county and state in America. But voting regulations are just the start. This legislation would deliberately turn the Federal Elections Commission into a partisan Democratic panel. They want their own side enforcing election law on their own, unilaterally. It would authorize federal bureaucrats to poke around in a much broader slice of private citizens' free speech. It would attack Americans' privacy rights to such an extreme degree that even the liberal ACLU is sounding alarm bells about this bill. It would have the federal government take public money and send it directly to political campaigns so Americans can subsidize robocalls, junk mail, and TV ads for candidates they disagree with. So the marketing has changed constantly. This has gone from an election security bill to an ethics bill to a racial justice bill. Who knows what it'll be labeled tomorrow? But what doesn't change is the substance, because the intention doesn't change. The Democratic Party, on its own, wants to rewrite the ground rules of American politics for their benefit. We all know that's what this is about. It's hard to imagine anything that would erode public confidence in our democracy more drastically. This bill has purely partisan support in the House. It had bipartisan opposition. It's one thing to make fiscal policy that way, to use reconciliation to tax and to spend. It's very different to try to hotwire our democracy itself without a single vote from the other side.
Joining me now to react is Dr. Carol Swain, who is the founder of BeThePeople.com. Dr. Swain, thanks so much for joining me today.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I certainly agree with Senator McConnell, because what the Democrats are trying to do is to use racial and ethnic minorities to push through a system that would be one party. And if you look at the policies that they support, it doesn't make minorities better off. And the Voting Rights Act, which was passed in 1965 to ensure Black Americans and other minorities the right to cast the ballot and to remove restrictions, I mean, they've turned it on its head, because what they are pushing would neutralize and dilute the votes of all legal Americans. And it is about helping those who are undocumented to vote, as well as those who are felons and people they believe who will be sympathetic to them.
Right, and I can just imagine if they thought that felons and illegal aliens who came into this country in any of these voting blocks would vote heavily Republican, they would be the first to say, no, 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 this is ridiculous. And yet, that's what they're accusing Republicans of doing, when really the Republicans are wanting to make sure that free and fair elections are secure, as you said, that every legal vote is not diluted. This is not about selecting one party over another. It's about giving every American the equal opportunity to cast their vote and have it matter and count. And so as the American people, and I asked this to my last panel, Dr. Swain, because I think a lot of people feel really frustrated. They feel like, you know, we can't do anything now that the 2020 election is over. What do you see as the best way to combat this type of effort, even more than just how Senate Republicans thankfully are standing up?
Well, they are too much too late. I think they need a campaign to educate American voters about what they will lose if this legislation passes. And as far as the ballot harvesting, there's a lot of intimidation involved for racial and ethnic minorities when 3 or 4 people show up at your door demanding your ballot. And in some cases, they have ballots. And people, in a situation like that, and you had thuggish people standing on your doorstep, they would either hand them a ballot. They're certainly not going to hand them a ballot that's voting for the candidate that they are not supporting. So usually it's the Democrats. They go into the inner city, they go in numbers, they're demanding ballots, and I think voters are intimidated. And they pressure people who have no intention of voting. They really pressure those people to vote the way the Democrats want them to.
Yeah, and I think people aren't realizing how dangerous and how manipulating this idea of ballot harvesting really is, because it started out as this idea that if you had a family member or if you were a caregiver that they actually needed assistance and help with turning in their ballot, then you were able to, and there was a cap and there's a limit in some states on how many ballots each individual person could turn in for someone who is not themselves. But this idea of ballot harvesting, as you just said, is this way that Democrats are now manipulating what was a good idea to then go and try to just harvest and claim a lot more ballots and votes through intimidation. And so when you have these types of laws and these types of situations, it seems like it would be so straightforward that we should all be able to agree that election integrity matters, every legal vote should count, and that people shouldn't be able to illegally harvest or have any of these lack of security measures. I mean, it's so ridiculous that Democrats are even supporting any contrary idea.
I mean, the whole idea that they would be opposed to voter ID, that was never about Black people. It was always about them trying to vote people who were undocumented. And when it comes to ballot harvesting, they will hire third-party vendors, organizations to go and collect those ballots. And so any kind of group could organize and collect ballots. And that's where you get the intimidation, people standing on your doorstep demanding that you give them your ballot. And that happens in the inner city. And I believe that in the 2020 elections, we know that there were so many things that went wrong. This HR 1, SR1, what it would do is it would legalize some of the things that were questionable in the last election. They're trying to legalize these things. And if that happens, I believe we will have a one-party nation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad to see that some states and a lot of different organizations are pushing the states to get really good legislation. And so Doug Ducey, who's the governor of Arizona, just announced that he signed the bill today. It's Senate Bill 1485 out of Arizona that is going to eventually have a system to purge the voting rolls and to make sure that people who are inactive or ineligible don't vote. So that's a good step. And the states need to reclaim their ability to move forward with their own election law and just reject this if it gets passed. Carol, what do you think is the possibility of the judicial branch actually standing firm and saying, no, this is against the Constitution?
I don't have a lot of confidence in the judicial branch. And what I think people need to do is to finance a campaign, just like as if you were running for office, to educate American voters of both political parties, because Democrats, the average Democrat, if they knew what was in that legislation, they would not be in favor of it. And I think that most voters don't know. The Republicans should be educating them, because Republicans themselves in Congress, they have failed us repeatedly. We cannot put our confidence in them. They are always a day late and a dollar short.
Yeah, it starts with education always, and that's why civics is so important, and we can't just take the top line messaging from mainstream media. We have to educate ourselves. And Dr. Swain, in the last few minutes I have with you here, you're in Tennessee, that's your home state, and your Governor Bill Lee just announced today that Tennessee is not going to be taking unemployment funding in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is clearly over. We are past that, and so he's saying that Tennessee has enough jobs available. They're not going going to take any more funding from the federal government. Do you think he made the right decision?
He absolutely made the right decision because there are many people that are staying at home. They're not working. They could be working. But I would like Governor Lee to go one step further. He needs to end all the stimulus money related to COVID that's going into various cities, especially those blue cities that's funding things. And these are cities that mismanage their budgets, and all of a sudden they're flush with cash. And so I think the unemployment, extra benefits, that should be eliminated, but also all the stimulus money, we should send it back.
Yeah, and I think that he's been a great leader in this. I agree with you that this needs to go even further, and I love that Ron DeSantis just ended the COVID restrictions in Florida. Every single governor needs to do that now, and we the people need to stand up firm and say we are not going to buy into these ridiculous lies anymore. I mean, when you have the CDC that's so arbitrary, Dr. Swain, and they're just saying, okay, well now this is what we think, and yesterday was the complete opposite. Clearly, it's arbitrary and ridiculous.
Absolutely. And I travel a lot. And when I go to the blue states and fly into those airports and all the shops are closed, I mean, I feel so sorry for the people that are oppressed and, being forced to wear the mask. In the red states, there's a lot of liberty. And I'm glad I live in a red state, but I'm concerned about all the people from the blue states that are moving to Tennessee and moving to other areas of the country because I'm afraid they will bring their values with them and we will end up in the same situation eventually.
Yeah, they're leaving California for a reason, so don't turn Texas or Tennessee or Florida into another California. So you heard it right here. Dr. Swain, thanks so much for joining me. We'll be right back with more here on Just the Truth.